So, after our long discussion about theory paragraphs, we finished up the synchronous session by sharing some first thoughts about Plath and Rich. And people had lots of interesting things to say. There were lots of observations about the powerful language of these two women writers from who began their careers in the 50s and 60s. Um, Big emphasis on metaphor. People picked out various metaphor and images from various poems they thought was interesting. Clearly, both Plath and Rich are masters of imagery and metaphor. There was some interesting discussion on their attitudes about men. We talked about how Plath is not a man hater, but she's frustrated by the double standard. She's frustrated that men have freedom that she doesn't. She's frustrated that there's this patriarchal, abusive dynamic between men and women, but she's also frustrated that women accede to that dynamic, cooperate with that dynamic. So it's much more complicated, we said, than just dismissing her as hating men. And Rich, we noticed, doesn't really talk about men, that really her interest, even from the early poems, is about women. And then, of course, by the time she gets to her lesbian feminist work in the late 70s, she wants men out of the narrative because she's trying to draw attention to an alternative narrative, a narrative not dominated by heterosexuality, but by lesbian sexuality or other variations of romance and desire that don't come from a heterosexual kind of mythology that Rich is creating. And so by obsessing about men, or Rich's fear that is if her poem obsesses with men even negatively, it keeps the conversation on and about men rather than moving it to women, which is where she wants it. So that was an interesting thing that came up. Two of the Plath poems that got some discussion were Daddy and Lady Lazarus. There was a lot of discussion also about diving into the wreck from Rich and Rich's 21 Love Poems, which I really consider a masterpiece of American literature. So a couple people brought up ideas from John Green, whose video they really enjoyed and pulled some interesting insights about Plath from. I mentioned Plath's journals and what a productive source they are for perspective on the experience of being a talented woman who wants to pursue your writing skills in an era where you weren't supposed to do that, right? Where you were supposed to be sort of the idealized domestic wife and mom. And then we also I brought up a dynamic reading of Diving into the Wreck. And I'd like to share a few minutes of that with you again here because I know a lot of you didn't go check it out. You didn't have time or you were rushing because there's so much to do in this class. But I really want to draw your attention to it because it's a terrific performance. And I thought I would just play the first couple minutes to inspire you to pursue it on your own.
Diving into the Wreck by Audrey and Rich.
First, having heard the book of myths and loaded the camera and checked the edge of the knife blade, I put on the body armor of black rubber, the absurd flippers, the grave and awkward mask. I'm having to do this, not like Cousteau with his assiduous team aboard the sun-flooded schooner, but here alone. There is a ladder. The ladder is always there, hanging innocently close to the side of the schooner. We know what it is for, we who have used it. Otherwise, it's a piece of maritime floss, some sundry equipment. I go down, rung after rung, and still the oxygen immerses me, the blue light, the clear atoms of our human air. I go down, my flippers cripple me. I crawl like an insect down the ladder, and there is no one to tell me where the ocean will begin.
So I don't know how well you could hear that performance. If you couldn't, you can click on the link and just listen to the first 30 seconds or so. It's so dramatic. It's not, by the way, how Rich reads the poem, and it's not Rich reading it, but it's so dramatic. It captures the power of this poem, which is about exploring any kind of wreck. In this case, it's the wreck of the psychologically damaged self, the wreck of gender relationships, the wreck of poetry and American culture. There's so many wrecks that could be the symbolic object of this metaphor, right, of this extended metaphor. And it's such a masterpiece of a poem, and I hope you'll spend some time with it. It's a great material for paper number 2 as well. So what's all this about? Well, I've shared all these thoughts about Plath and Rich just to get you jump started on your own thinking. I'd like you to do a 1 to 2 minute video response to this video in which you share your reactions to Plath and Rich. What jumps out at you from one or the other? Just pick one poet or the other. You can talk about a poem, an idea, a reflection, a cultural context, anything you want to share. But share with us your insights into Plath and Rich. Thanks.